Okay, hello everyone. It's a great pleasure to welcome you all for this very timely discussion. As you know, we are meeting 10 days before the European Council gathers on 15th of December, and we're all awaiting whether the Council will actually endorse the Commission recommendation and start accession negotiations with Ukraine and Moldova and grant candidate status to Georgia. We have online audience. You are here in person. This is great. This is not under the House rules. It's on the record. So feel free to tweet whatever you find interesting. We have lots of interesting questions. Of course, we expect that the Council will endorse the recommendation and turn it into a decision. But will it go as expected? Or will there be one member state, or perhaps more, who will decide to block this decision? Will the unanimity be maintained, or we will see more challenges on Ukraine's road to EU? How important this decision is for Ukraine, I think, is most clearly demonstrated by the timing when Ukraine applied for the EU membership. Ukraine did this within basically a few days of the Russian invasion. And President Zelensky said that Europe was their home. And rather unexpectedly, we can say that Europe reciprocated very quickly. The President of the European Council said, "Welcome home, welcome to the EU." So is the EU actually ready to integrate one of the largest, by European standards, war-torn countries with no clear security guarantees? This is another big question that we are facing. Of course, the logic of Ukraine was clear. This is a rescue operation for Ukraine. And I think the logic is very much in line with the very project of the European Union. If we paraphrase British historian Alan Milward, he said that European integration was a rescue for European nation states who understood that they needed to unite, who came out of the wars, hot and cold, and understood that they needed to be united in order for Europe to be free and at peace. But this project, this process, cannot really be complete without Ukraine. However, we have to see how difficult it will be, what are the internal challenges that Ukraine is facing, and what are external challenges, and what the European Union, and whether it will be able to reform at the same time as embark in this very complicated and arguably the most consequential of rounds of enlargement. So to talk about this and to take your questions and questions from the audience, we have a wonderful panel, and I will introduce each speaker as they start. And I would like to start with our dear guest, Viola von Krammen, who is a member of European Parliament from the German Green Party. She is an MEP since 2019. Before, she was a member of German Bundestag, and she is a very big friend of Ukraine, has been engaged with Ukraine since the 90s, as I discovered. She just comes from Ukraine. She spent there last week, so she'll have lots to tell us.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you, Natalie. Thanks to all of you attending this great discussion panel here this afternoon in London. To be honest, I was for a long time, I was very optimistic because it's so crystal clear. As you said, for Ukraine, it's a little bit like a lifeline. It is very clear Ukrainians, with their bravery, they're fighting for European values. They have achieved and they have implemented most of the reforms which were on the agenda of the European Commission. We from the European Parliament are in very close exchange with our colleagues in the Verkhovna Rada. We have seen how difficult it was during wartime to really work through the legislative agenda, but they have done so. They gave all the European demands the priority which was needed, and so on and so forth. That's why the European Commission 2-3 weeks ago gave a very positive progress report for Ukraine, but also for Moldova, for example, and that is absolutely deserved. So far, we had the impression that it could be doable to find a compromise with the spoiler in the whole game, which is Hungary. Hungary has its own agenda. Hungary works as Putin's man, obviously, in the European Union, tries to destroy the union from inside, and it's becoming more and more obvious. First, he mentioned there's the Hungarian minority in the Zakarpathian region, then there was something else, so he uses one or the other argument for his own national interest. But now it's not only that. Now it's becoming even more difficult, while we have seen that another group of member states, such as Austria, but also the Slovak Republic, coming up with the idea, well, it can't just be Ukraine getting this favor of beginning the accession talks, but there must be also something for the Western Balkans. And this layer, I think, complicated things. While some of us here in the room work also on the Western Balkans, we have seen that it is a merit-based process, and there's not too much merit seen in the last month and weeks in most of the Western Balkan states. But, of course, we need to make sure that the process, accession process, on Ukraine is not blocked, while actually, I would say still Austria and Slovak, and I don't know, they're the third country besides Hungary blocking this, can be convinced and can be making, hopefully taken on board. So we have on one hand the European Commission putting up a huge financial package of 50 billion euros for 4 years, making sure we are not dealing year by year on an annual basis, on a half annual basis to give this budget support for Ukraine during wartime, and also having a leverage on Ukraine's political agenda. We in the European Parliament, I think, have even improved this, this facility, waiting now for the Council to give green light on that. And now in the process where everyone was pretty much optimistic that the Council decision could be taken, we have to acknowledge that, as I said, it's not just Hungary. There are so many actors which are unpredictable that I have to admit I'm becoming more and more pessimistic. I might stop here and we will come back, but I could go on. I don't want to dominate this too much, so maybe we ask others.
Thank you, Viola. We'll go now to Ukraine, and I would like to ask Orysia Lucevich, who is head of Ukraine Forum here and deputy director of Eurasia-Russia program. She knows a lot about social change, transformation, the role of civil society, and also how to build democratic resilience for external interference. And I hope you can talk to us a little bit from the perspective of Ukraine, how it all looks like, what are the domestic challenges, and what is at stake.
Thank you, Natalie. I also want to introduce you because I think it's the first time we are sitting on this stage together. Natalie just joined us. She is the Senior Research Fellow at Russia and Eurasia Program, also a very experienced diplomat from Georgia. She served as the ambassador to the European Union, so she knows what she's talking about for this panel, right? Very good moderator. Thank you for having us in this conversation. I mean, I came from Ukraine in the beginning of November. We were with my colleague Anna Morgan. They are discussing about the reconstruction and meeting with the Ukrainian civil society, but I had my little side jump to a Ukrainian Catholic university where there was a discussion between the older generation of dissidents and the younger activists in civil society, and the topic was justice. What is just peace and what is justice for these Ukrainians? And they were coming from all avenues of life, from culture, from rule of law, from helping with the military, technology now for the front line. And I was struck when they were talking about justice. I thought they would talk about kind of retribution for Russian aggression, that it is so important that there is justice as an international law, but they talked about how to build a just society and how it is important that children rise being honest and have integrity, how it is important that politicians are actually held accountable. And this would have been a conversation in any European university, from Rome to here, Canterbury. So I think we have to really understand that Ukraine is part of the European cultural space, that space of culture where, of course, throughout the centuries, the approximation and fusion between Ukraine and the European civilization was arrested by Ukrainian history, by the fact that the country was torn between three imperial projects: Russia, Ottoman Empire, and Polish expansion. And this is what Ukraine is now fighting, is to put an end to that pathway of arrested European development. And you could see clearly a spike in numbers for the support in European Union membership even before the aggression. If you compare like full-scale aggression, in 2012, only 36% supported, for example, membership in EU. In 2021, 58 already. That was, after the annexation of Crimea. But now, today, the most recent number is 78% support membership in the European Union and 77% in NATO. So you have a tectonic shift where Ukraine has taken a political decision, and it is clear. And what is very important is that for Ukrainians now, after almost more than 600 days of war, Europe became the home front. So many Ukrainians do find safety, children, women, 90% of Ukrainian refugees are. This is where the future of Ukrainian nation is being saved and preserved. The children are being educated, they're going also to Ukrainian Sunday schools to learn their tradition and language, and it's priceless. And in this way, I think Ukraine is already, in a big way, integrated into the European Union. And then, of course, all of this comes to practical ways. Can we, and what should happen? And I would like to just maybe say a few words on what Viola mentioned, how even during the war, Ukraine has shown that it can reform. And some of these 7 conditions that the Commission put, they're quite serious. They were looking at the core issue of judiciary reform. For example, the selection of judges to Constitutional Court. Or, for example, Ukraine had to finish integrity checks for the candidates for High Council of Judges and High Qualification Commission of Judges. It has to comply to FATFA money laundering regulation, to devise a strategy on reform for law enforcement sector. These are the key pillars of independence, judiciary. What is remaining, and it hasn't complete all the 100%, there are still remaining issues of reappointing the head of the National Anti-Corruption Bureau, providing more powers to the Anti-Corruption Bureau to investigate and verify assets of high-level government officials. Ukraine has to look at its lobbying regulation, for example, how oligarchs of vested interest could influence or not the political system. And yes, what Hungary keeps pushing, it's the educational law on ethnic minorities. But, the Ukraine's pathway to Europe comes to 3 key things. One, it's prosperity and economy. Another one is independence of institutions and political modernization. And the third one, it's actually market regulation that will make Ukraine part of the European market. This is what European integration is. And of course, like Natalie said, it's the largest country geographically in Europe. It has 42 million hectares of agricultural land, which is twice more than France. So that is difficult for absorption capacity, which will require reform of the EU. But there also is an immense opportunity. Ukraine has an enormous resources of critical minerals, a very talented labor, digital governance that we can learn a lot. But of course, I personally believe Ukraine can achieve a lot of these transformations that I mentioned. We can talk more in Q&A. And what gives me hope is when I go to Ukraine and when I meet with business leaders, members of parliament, They know what is Ukraine's stumbling block to growth, and that is modernization of institutions. It's always the most difficult thing, but Ukrainians are on it. They know what is on their agenda, and they're not fooling themselves that they can somehow fudge it through this time and become a member of European Union. They will work hard for it. And I think I'll stop here, and then we can discuss obstacles, enablers, politics of EU or politics of Ukraine. Thank you, Natalie.
Thank you, Orysia. And it's very important how you highlighted how this whole accession process is actually contributing to transformation and motivates the change in the countries. I mean, and it's, you know, the accession, the enlargement has been considered one of the most successful EU policies. And paradoxically, it has gotten a pretty bad name lately, particularly over the last decade, which led to this sort of non-enlargement policy for a while. And it took Russian invasion for this to come back on the table. So I would like to bring you, Sebastian. Our last speaker is Sebastian Maillard, who's recently joined Chatham House as an associate fellow. He directed Jacques Delors Institute before in Paris. He had a career in journalism and was Rome and Brussels correspondent for La Croix. And he also taught, and maybe you still do, in Sciences Po and Boston College. So I would like to hear from you how EU is going to deal with this return of enlargement on its agenda, and how is it going to combine and balance this geopolitical urgency, which actually brought it back to the agenda, with the need to respect for criteria, which is in many ways part of its political identity.
Well, thank you, Natalie, for organizing this very timely meeting ahead of next week's European Council. You are right to mention that it is the return of enlargement, in the fact that we all remember in 2014 when we had previous European elections and Jean-Claude Juncker had his mandates, proudly saying there will be no enlargement during my mandate, and which was perhaps the best way to demotivate any candidate country. But we were at the time not at all in the mood for any enlargement, because it was not only about enlargement fatigue, as we call it, but I mean, Europe was really, the EU was in an existential crisis. We had the euro debt crisis, migration crisis already, and the Brexit challenge, and many issues. So it's true that I think when Ukraine, Georgia, and Moldova, right after the Russian invasion, applied for EU membership, I must say it was almost a shock also in the EU to say, they really trust us. It was almost, I think, a big surprise for member states to be taken so seriously by those countries, that we really want to come in now. And I think, yes, it has, at least I witnessed this in France, that it has changed the mindset on enlargement. France has probably been the most reluctant country on any kind of enlargement, except Greece perhaps, but otherwise we have had a long track record of vetoes and on when it comes to enlargement. But I've really witnessed this at the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Élysée, Matignon, all but not only in France, but the fact that enlargement, which was before seen as a burden, something, well, we have to take those countries in, and now it seems it's really regarded as a geopolitical imperative, as the fact that Putin, and for security reasons, we know that there must be no more gray zones on our continent, and we cannot afford, even for our own security, to let the EU as it is. And so in that way there is we could have witnessed the French veto before, and now on the contrary, I think France is one of the countries advocating for enlargement. I share the pessimism, or at least I don't exactly know how the next week's European Council is going to end up. a month ago, I would have been perhaps more optimistic on the fact that you know, the Commission had done this report on the 8th of November. It said that Ukraine had met 4 out of the 7 steps to be completed before getting accession, and then it would report back in March next year on how it has assessed this. But we could open the accession talks, because I think when it comes to enlargement, the difficulty today that there is a sort of a gap between the political signal given and the legal procedure as it moves. What I mean by that is that you can, let's say, if we're optimistic, can say that the European Council decides to open accession talks with Ukraine, and then actually the negotiation framework takes a bit longer, and then you have several steps before it actually really happens. And then we know that, you know, before Ukraine enters, you know, there are 35 chapters in a new treaty of accession, and it's a veto. There's a veto around the corner all the way, because it takes a unanimity of 27 member states to open and to close each single 35 of the 35 chapters. You know this very well. And so if it's not Orban today, it can be someone else. And I would be a bit, because when there's a veto, when the country vetoes, there's always other countries hiding behind that veto. Orban likes to play the bad cop, but yes, when it comes to Ukraine, you have countries, member states that are passionate about Ukraine, and of course the Baltic states are perhaps the most pushy on it. Poland, to a certain extent, but I'm sure with the hopefully new Prime Minister of Donald Tusk, it will be very supportive of Ukraine accession. A country like the Netherlands has always been, like France, very cautious on any enlargement, and we remember that in 2016 they had a referendum where the Dutch had said no to the ratification of the Ukrainian Deep Comprehensive Association Agreement. So we don't know yet when there will be a new Dutch government, but it's not. We cannot be quite reassured on the way it goes. So even if accession talks at the end of the day start, yes, it will be a long way to go. And I'll end on the idea that may, I think, move on in the coming months, is the idea of a stage accession. And I think it's something perhaps we can also discuss. The idea that even if we enlarge, the EU will enlarge, but perhaps it will not enlarge in the same procedure as done for the previous enlargement. Because for a country as big as Ukraine, I mean, it's a tall order. And if you don't want to wait 10 years before Ukrainians enjoy some of the benefits of EU membership, and instead of going from 0 to 1, you can perhaps do it step by step. We can perhaps discuss more the idea, but I think it's a way also to compromise between some countries who want Ukraine to enter as quickly as possible, others who are very reluctant, and it's a way also to get out of any debate on fixing a date or an entry date. So I think stage accession can have a future in the way we enlarge the EU.
Thanks a lot, Sebastian. Yeah, EU officials are very reluctant to mention dates, but it was an exception that Charles Michel actually spoke about 2030, which is very soon, right? Because we know that it takes on average from 7 to 9 years to exceed. The exception was Sweden and Finland. They did it in 3 years, but they were coming from European Economic Area. However, Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia would have had association agreement with DCFTA since 2014, and that covers about 70% of acquis. So it's interesting to see how ready will they be and how fast this can go. The staged accession is an interesting one. I would like Viola to first disagree with any of your colleagues, because I saw you disagreeing, and that would be more fun if you disagree. But Sebastian spoke about the change of attitude in France, and perhaps you could tell us a little bit how it's going on in Germany, because we hear a lot about it. And perhaps you can also mention, and there was a question here that I will kind of rephrase, about the reform of the EU. Should it go in parallel? Should it happen before? Because there's a lot of discussion that first the EU should reform, and there was this proposal, Franco-German proposal, on how to deal with this. So I would like your reactions.
Yeah, thank you very much. First of all, I think we should not forget, I said it's a merit-based process, but it is a geopolitical decision, and Putin is watching what we are doing, whether we succeed or whether we fail. As long as we cannot make up our mind, as we do not find a mechanism how to compromise with Orban, he will succeed. And if you see what he does on the military side, he's upscaling the military industrial sector 24/7, which we cannot match, which we don't match, which we obviously do not want to match. I think we need at least to come up with a political proposal for Ukraine for Euro integration. At least this is what we owe to the people and to the citizens of Ukraine. My biggest concern is that at this current state, where Ukraine is not successful on the military side, where we see that the counter-offensive is not as successful as expected. In Washington, there might be a change in the White House, that Putin has just the time, and he will put more people after the so-called election on the 17th of March. There will be a third wave of mobilization. Hungary will have in the second half of next year the EU presidency, and there will be nothing in terms of a military further step forward of liberated territory, neither a political solution. And that might have consequences which are hopefully not come into force, but which might be predictable. And I don't think these consequences are being discussed in, let's say, in real term in all the capitals. Maybe in Paris, I don't know, but definitely not in Berlin with the necessary consequences. So I'm not in favor of the state accession, especially while some of the leaders in the Western Balkan would be terribly happy if they do not have to comply with the political reform. They just get these economical benefits. They just would go for the domestic market, for the internal market, and no political reforms. And the problem will be that those partners we have in these countries, the young generation, the more progressive people, they actually stay as long as they have the perspective that there is this transitional momentum, which some people doubt already that this might be possible. So I think without a full-fledged membership for all the candidate countries, be it Georgia or Albania or Bosnia, I guess this is not. It will look like a waiting room for most of the countries we are talking about. So I would be very much in favor to make sure we have an agenda. There are the political reforms, and yes, of course, you can give them a little bit more of economical, freedom, or with the association agreement, as Natalie has mentioned, they have already 70% of the acquis and the intensification of trade and so on. But nevertheless, I think the ultimate goal should be as soon as possible to bring them into the European Union. Yes, and we need to make sure, and that is my biggest concern, or my second biggest concern, that these reforms will not be taken as serious as they need to be taken to speed up and to have the pace we need to integrate Ukraine. Oresa was speaking about the Common Agricultural Politics, the CAP. You should not forget that more than 20 or 30% of the agriculture soil underplow is now mined. So it is the country, and it will take decades. So Bosnia is still not demined after how many years? So it still takes, I think, 10, 20, 15 years for Bosnia, which is much smaller. So in Ukraine, we speak about at minimum 70 to 80 years. In that respect, I would say we need to reform our common agricultural policy anyway, and this is then a good reason maybe to speed up with this. And we had other bigger agriculture players like Romania or Bulgaria, where we also mentioned to integrate them. I would not be too afraid of that, because our farmers now come up already with petitions and resolution against Ukraine's accession as such, because it's such a danger, it's such a for their existence, which I think it's doable. So I would say let's focus on what is priority, and this is military. We need to make sure we match the capacities which Russia puts forward. We don't. Then the political agenda, I think we have to really talk tougher with Orban. We don't do this so far. We always hope we can come up with a financial compromise. I don't think this is enough. We need harder political instruments. There is no political initiative in the Council so far. And then you ask how much Germany is committed to enlargement. Well, it's hard to say. I think they are the ones hiding behind others. They don't say this in public. No, they don't say this in public, but maybe it's fair to say some partners are more in favor of enlargement, and some partners are closer to Ukraine's membership than others. But definitely when it comes to financial commitments and pledges, we have a great reluctance amongst those coalition partners in the current government, and that does not make things easier. So I might leave it at this.
Thanks a lot, Viola. We have about half an hour, so I will open now the floor to questions. Please introduce yourself and make your questions short and sharp. Please.
Hi, my name is Terry Paddock. I'm a Chatham House member. At an event at Chatham House last week, referencing several of the panelists talking about Orban and other bad actors within the EU currently. At one of the events last week, one of the panelists was even more pessimistic and predicted that after next year's elections, the EU may actually be subject to a far-right takeover. So the question is two-part. Do you think that is likely? And if so, if that did happen, would Ukraine still want to be a member?
One more question, perhaps, and then we will ask the panelists. Please.
Hi, thank you to the panelists. My name is David. I'm a foreign policy advisor for the MOD here in the UK. Ursula mentioned towards the start of this that modernisation of Ukrainian institutions is key. And I just wanted to know from all of you, and perhaps Natalie as well, what should the top 2 or 3 priorities for Zelensky be on that institution modernisation programme? Thank you.
Thank you. You can start, Viola, and then all three of you.
Maybe I start with your question. What we see in the last weeks and month, and that is a little bit contradicting what we said before, but it's in the same way also worrying, that Zelensky tries to consolidate his power at the moment, that he used the martial law to make sure that political opponents don't have a chance, neither in the media sector nor in the Verkhovna Rada. So that is something that needs to stop. And if your Minister of Defense can have her honest talk with some of the leaders in Ukraine, this would be super helpful because if we support Ukraine, we do this because we expect to uphold democratic standards also in the political arena, and that is necessary. We need to see that the opposition rights are not cut off, that our colleagues are allowed to travel and things like that. And there is a very worrying development, I have to admit, and this needs to be taken on board. On the other hand, Ukraine is always portrayed as a corrupt country. I would say there were, before the war, really functioning anti-corruption institutions, anti-corruption bodies installed, and they worked. They are partially also abolished or put on hold. And also here, we would like to see a little bit more of an engagement and less involvement of the office of the president, but rather the independence of these integrity bodies and a merit-based process by appointing people who run this institution. I think this is important, and we need to stress that. And yes, then when it comes to decentralization, the European Union had invested more than 90 million in decentralized structure. That is why Ukraine was so resilient. And also here we see a consolidation of power, kicking mayors out of office and things like that. This is not acceptable, and this would be great if you could raise this on the top level. Regarding the likelihood of a takeover, I wouldn't say so, but I would say there is a shrinking center after the election. And if you see the predictions, if you see the polls, of course, many things can happen for the next 6 months to come, but we are all getting ready, in case we are re-elected, that we need to compromise, that we have to be ready to work cross-party. We do this anyway, but probably we have to stretch even more. We have to be ready to work with more conservative or socialist or liberals, to have this broad majority in the center, to have a democratic majority when we speak to the other EU institutions, but also to third actors. And there we are very much, of course, afraid if we do not agree on certain topics, it will be much easier for the right-wing groups, for the right-wing parties to destroy or to make themselves heard.
Please. I will just add to Viola's list. I think it's a good exercise, and thank you for this question. I think the key issue Ukraine has to resolve is a real separation of powers. This is the keystone of any democratic society, and where in Ukraine the risks are is where there's especially the fusion between judiciary and executive. And executive, as of course, is coming now, especially under the power of the president. And we have to cut that cord, because that allows for all kinds of problems, for control of the opposition, for takeover of some of the assets. And Ukraine will come out of this war in a complicated situation where the share of the state-owned enterprises increases. Ukraine will have to have a transparent privatization, will have to ensure that no new vested interests appear, and how that process will be done will, to a large degree, define the landscape of Ukrainian economy. This is so important. Decentralization, Viola mentioned, and one key reform that is required across agencies and ministries, it's public administration. People are underpaid, people are undertrained, they are representing some private interest rather than working in some cases for the public interest. I would say this is one of the reforms that was put on hold by Zelensky when he came to power. I think he's a better wartime president than he was at the beginning, the peacetime president. His attitude to institutions is questionable. You go back to his track record. The parliament was basically rubber stamping a lot of things rather than really executing oversight and and democratic accountability. So that I would say is the list, and EU is perfect for that. It's really the list for Ukraine. It's an interesting question because I come back to this pre-war time where Zelensky was elected on the national populist ticket. He was the one who spoke against elites. He was the one who spoke, will put people, corrupt elite to jail. It's very much the agenda in many anti-European parties. So in that way, Ukraine is already European. So I think, yes, it will still want to join European Union.
Sebastian, I would like you to comment also on the rise, particularly of pro-Putin right-wing parties in Europe. We can call them like this because it's the ideological affinity is very clear. And I will add a couple questions from the chat. What would be the benefits of Ukraine's membership to the EU? We always talk about the benefits for Ukraine, but how about to the EU?
But on the question regarding the future European elections on the 9th of June next year, many things can happen still. I also don't believe in a completely blocked parliament. I suppose it will be even more split than it is today, with a difficult majority to find. But what I also observe is how the war in Ukraine has divided far-right countries, for instance, and we saw some Finnish go from one group to the other group because they didn't felt at ease with the group where the pro-Russians are. They were all, I think, yesterday in Florence gathering around Salvini, where Le Pen was and others. But the ECR Meloni's group, who is pro-NATO and pro-Ukraine, they have the gap between the two groups has increased. It would be, and I know how far the compromise can go with such a group because it depends who also is in it in the next year's election. But maybe they may move a bit more toward the EPP, which is also, I think, torn on those issues. So yes, it will be a difficult parliament anyhow. But we must also remember that the EU is not just the European Parliament. I mean, it's also the Council of the EU, where you would have ministers from the future Dutch government, from Slovakia, that will also weigh in the decision making. So, we see it in the case of Hungary. I mean, it takes only one country to veto. So. The European elections, of course, are very important, but I mean it's one of the two co-legislators, and I'm also worried about how the Council of Ministers evolve. So that's perhaps just one slight comment on the stage accession to make myself a bit more clear on this. I believe it's fit for Ukraine because when we speak about enlargement, we're talking about 9 countries. I'm not even mentioning Turkey, which is another story and which could be another debate. But for the 9 countries, Moldova, Ukraine, Georgia, and the 6 Western Balkans, they're all very different. And the perhaps stage accession, I think, can make sense for a country as huge and big as Ukraine, which is perhaps the biggest to integrate. I don't believe it's make any sense for a country like Montenegro, which has already 32 chapters open for accession, and we're not at the same stage. Bosnia-Herzegovina, its neighbor, is a completely different order. I mean, it's the state building is very fragile. So I think if we want to keep some merit-based, I think I'm not saying there is a one-size-fits-all solution for everyone. But I think stage accession is part of the solution for this enlargement, especially when it comes to a country to the size and with financial consequences as Ukraine. By the way, Serbia, I know, is completely against any stage accession because they're afraid that, and I was in Belgrade recently, where they're afraid that this will. That it can be a trick from the member states to keep them, to derail it, and Orban, the other side, is very supportive of Serbia's entry to the so it's that's why when we talk about enlargement, it's always, I think, very important to specify which country we're talking about, because it's they're all different stories. You had another question?
Yes, I had a question from the chat on benefits of Ukraine's accession to the EU, and I would like each of you to answer it, but I'll give you a little break and take one more question from the floor. Yes, please.
Yes, I'm Alan Flowers. I'm not a member here, but I'm an academic. Alan Flowers, I'm a British academic that's been engaged with Ukraine for around about the last 20 years, and it's lovely to hear Lisa saying exactly what I've experienced, the massive human, the mineral resources, agricultural, particularly the human resources, which, by the way, I'd like to remind this House that Britain, with its British Council and Creative Spark programme, spawned hundreds and hundreds of start-up ideas, and unfortunately the war's got in the way, and this is exactly the sort of creative potential. So you're listening to Viola, that the cell's not good enough to some Western countries, and you might like to expand on that. That's really the line of my question, slightly following up a bit on what David was saying earlier. You know, where are these problems that we've got? Because it seems to me, if they just listen to Alicia, it's a no-brainer. There's so much to gain, except that huge elephant in the room, and I've personally experienced it, the whole corruption and the whole political issues that you are highlighting, and I think we'd like to tease a bit more on that out, but I'd like to do it in the context of, I was there in 2014. We had the association agreement, DCFTA. Perhaps you'd like to comment on, you know, where was the lost opportunity there? Because winding 9 years forward, we don't seem to have got to where I would have hoped we would have been when we were there in 2014. And corruption, personally experienced it. I think, Viola, a little bit of rose-coloured spectacles there. I mean, I've been running projects there. I get stopped from getting on a train if I don't have a ticket, because the conductor knows about the anti-corruption process and they're worried they'll lose their job.
All right.
But the big money, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, I'm suffering from wiring and all the usual stuff. It's not been clobbered.
Okay, thank you. So how do we sell Ukraine's accession to European public? Viola, maybe we'll start.
I mean, exactly what the gentleman has mentioned. I think the potential is huge. I was in 2004 in Poland giving lectures why Ukraine would be a valuable member for the European Union, while everyone was laughing at me. And I think this is, I fully agree. If we had started a little bit earlier, I think that the DCTFA was actually a good tool to strengthen this civil society, to make sure that the next generation is very much aware that they have dismissed the Soviet culture of bribes and so on, but nevertheless the public administration people are underpaid, and there is a lot to do. But the digitalization, the IT, not just the agriculture, but in general, the labor is very skilled. There is a lot also on the academic in different spheres where we can cooperate, where we can benefit from. And in general, it is a question of stability and security. I mean, that is maybe not for everyone here in Britain is not in the EU, but everyone else in the European Union to feel, but it would make a big difference. And we need to make sure, if we want peace and stability in this on this continent, we have to make sure that Ukraine is part of that, integral part of that, and that people are not leaving the country, and this that is not a buffer zone left to Putin and his terror regime and stuff like this. And to be honest, if we are not reacting now, the longer we wait, the more expensive it will be, and the harder it will be to make sure that people trust themselves in our ability to give them this EU perspective. And at the moment, I think it looks very far away, but if you speak to the people, in Ukraine, but also outside the country, they're very much committed. And if we provide the right environment, political, economical environment, I'm pretty sure the majority will return and they will invest and they will definitely reconstruct the country with even more ambition.
Can I just jump in? I think there's no world of yesterday. It's over. 2 years ago, when Russia annexed Ukraine, there's no more waiting room. There's no more safe space where you can say this will be a space and we'll deal with you, well, maybe later. No, I mean, I think this is the urgency, and I think the Ursula von der Leyen said it well. EU has to answer this call to history. History is happening now. If we, as the European community, do not have an answer, then Putin will provide us an answer, and I'm not sure we're going to like it, what we hear, because we see what his answer is basically dragging the demodernizing agenda. So we simply have to choose. We cannot stand in between. There's no in between, and I think that is quite ironic when you think about it today. I was just thinking, I don't know if you read recently the Kundera's essay, The Kidnapped West, where ironically that he was quoting the Hungarian, right, speaking now of Hungary today, saying we are dying for Hungary and we're dying for Europe. Ukrainians are dying for Ukraine and they're dying for Europe. We still kind of, in some places, hear it vaguely, as there was a wake-up. I agree, there's change and the sea change. But when it comes to action and urgency of action, this is where we are perhaps not hearing the dying voices of Ukrainians as we are sitting here. I think next year will be critical, because if we procrastinate, you know, in different ways, and we could have various ways of procrastination, we're going to have bigger drama. In the end, we'll have a bigger bill. I mean, there was an interesting study by the Globsec think tank that calculated the cost of defeat of Ukraine just for Poland. They said right now Poland supplies 5 billion of military assistance to Ukraine equivalent. If Ukraine falls, it will be 25 billion just to secure the Polish border. So in the end, you know, whichever argument you choose, moral, cost-benefit analysis, civilizational, we know what we should be doing, but we have to do it. Sebastian, your reaction.
I agree that the postponing the decision, especially next week, on opening accession talks with Ukraine is the best Christmas gift we can give to Putin, because the longer we wait, then the more dangerous it gets. And why Ukraine can we benefit from its membership to the EU? Of course, it's not a benefit it takes years, because you really get the whole sense of it, and it's a country that has to be rebuilt. We've said it's huge. It requires demining, but I think we must understand the added value of Ukraine in the EU, seen also the way the EU project is changing in a multipolar world. In the Chinese and American rivalry, if the EU is to become a full-fledged power in its own right in this world, Ukraine can strengthen the EU for its defense, for its agriculture, for its energy, for its digital skills, for its technology. So on all these aspects, I'm confident that Ukraine makes the EU more powerful, and it makes sense if you see the EU as not just a peace project, as it is, but as also becoming a power project. And when we come about power, world power, then yes, we definitely need Ukraine, and I think that's the long-term argument to have it in. And of course, it deserves some cost. I mean, it's not. It cannot just be a free ride. And I understand that Polish farmers or Polish truck drivers are worried about we need a level playing field at the end of the day to have. I mean, but these are that's why I believe it has to be done step by step. It cannot be done suddenly overnight, but on a clear track that the Ukraine belongs to the EU.
It's keeping this momentum that is so important.
Should be clear.
Okay. And by the way, the momentum is in Ukraine and Moldova, but unfortunately not in the Western Balkans, who are not, I think, taking the opportunity they could get more to really also get on board.
But this is important. We should really make sure that we do not leave with the Western Balkan states out, because when I speak about stability and peace and security, Western Balkan, they are an integral part of that as well. Without, we will not. I mean, this might, hopefully not explode, but it's a very fragile
Russian
situation.
influence is not negligible there, right? Okay, we take one more round, and that would be it. Yes, you were waiting before, and then I turn.
The question is about presidential elections in Ukraine and all aspects of it: practicality, feasibility, optics, parliamentary elections, and freedom of speech. Now, whether it may be hijacked by Russians and have a negative effect, because we know Russians are very skilled in manipulating people's brain. So,
Please. Yeah, it's coming.
Hi, my name is Bohdan Siupin. I'm a journalist. I wanted to ask you about this argument that was mentioned today, that Ukraine is too rich and produces too much food. And that's why it's so scary. But I remember other scary situation when in London, basic food items disappeared from the shelves, and how people complained just recently about rising prices for basic food like bread and pasta and other things. So isn't it something wrong with that argument? Shouldn't we put to the people who consume food, who need it, rather than talking about, I don't know, some parts of agricultural lobby? Wouldn't it be powerful argument for Ukraine's accession in the EU?
Thank you.
Well, first, maybe your question. I think the whole idea came up with some alt-right Republicans not willing to pay the next tranche of financial aid, and they were questioning why it is a democracy if they do not hold elections. And with this spin, it was picked up partly in Ukraine, but then everyone realized this is not a question. We can't hold elections during a war. We do not have the electoral law for this. How about soldiers sitting in the trenches? How about everything, 8 million, 6 million people out of the country? How to organize that? This can't be transparent, inclusive, fair, free election. This is impossible. Now there's another wave of discussion, and it becomes more seriously, but I don't think this is realistic, not during this hot war time. But at one point, Ukrainians will have to decide whether they have to adopt a new regulation under martial law or how they're going to deal with this. But I've seen that it is mainly also in the interest of the ruling party or in the interest of Zelensky himself. I don't know what is the reason for that, but I think it's rather risky. And I think the way of manipulation and the traumatized society, many people are emotionally so hardly affected by the war, so many casualties. I think that is a huge risk going with this. So during the summer, I have realized that actually most of the moderate voices are extremely reluctant to put forward. But they try to say the European Union wants that. No, nobody in the European Union has ever asked for that. So I told them, no, this is not the reason. If you want to have them, then please discuss this internally, but none of us and none from the member states. As I said, Washington was behind that. Your question regarding the benefit in terms of food production, absolutely right. We are net importer, and we could easily use some of the grain, and then other food was, what happened now, was exported to countries where it is highly needed. So, I mean, we have a Polish government who uses this solidarity corridors, as they're called, solidarity lines, for their own political reason. Romania is completely silent. Even there is a lot of grain transport going on. So I would say some, let's say, neighboring countries such as Slovakia and Poland use the extraordinary situation that the harbors, the ports, can't be used in the way which was in the past. But normally, I think if we go on a step-by-step approach and if we reform the common agricultural policy, this shouldn't be a problem to integrate Ukraine. So I wouldn't be afraid.
Sebastian,
I agree with Viola. I mean, overall, I think she gave a great answer. There's one thing that Ukraine doesn't need to prove that it's democracy. It has had 6, elections, and it has peacefully changed the power. There's never been a state capture. And when there were risks to elections, Ukrainians went to the streets to defend elections in 2004. Something very important to remember. And then when they were also waving European flags back then, saying we want to be a member of the European Union as well. But I think Zelensky also said it well. It's important to defend the integrity of elections, and even if they do some kind of elections, who will recognize them as free and fair? So this has been totally put on in the drawer very deep because of the war and who is the main enemy, and this is where the effort of already quite exhausted population and the armed forces has to be directed, mobilized to fight that one battle. And I think one thing maybe to mention before we wrap up is that I think Ukraine not only exports grain, but it exports electricity. Before Russia was heavily hitting, its energy infrastructure, it was exporting electricity to Europe. It is exporting services. Ukrainian creators are, very active in all kinds of digital. And I think this is where, when we are making this calculus, Europe will not be stronger without Ukraine. Europe will not be more resilient. Europe will be more fragile because of these interlinkages that will actually reinforce Europe as a project, as European Union as a project, are so key. So I say we should make it a shared success. Sometimes we keep Ukraine or other accession countries at arm's length saying, well, you do the homework, then we'll discuss. I think it's important to make it a shared success. If there is a real determination in some countries, and maybe not everywhere, but in those countries where is that determination, it has to be a shared project of reconstruction of Ukraine, which will be the economic project of a century in Europe.
Sebastian, last word.
No, just a little comment on I agree what has been said on the elections. What sense does it make to organize elections during the war? Let's just remember, I think in this country, in the UK, during the Second World War, elections were postponed. So I think we can understand that there's a time for elections to be done properly. But I think to finish, we must also perhaps reflect on what it would mean not to enlarge. We said it as well before. As you know, enlargement was never popular in France, and before 2004, after 2004, the fact that today Poland, although the countries are in, it's not questioned. But what would have happened if they had not been entered? I mean, we would definitely not be where we are. And if Ukraine was not to become a member state, and we let out any accession perspective, I think with the Russian neighbor it has, I mean, it's just also a threat for us directly, and not just for the neighboring countries such as Poland and Baltic states, but it's a deep geopolitical concern for all of us. So I think the question can be answered, both the benefit but also the cost of non-enlargement, which is, I think, something that I hope the European Council next week will reflect on seriously.
Thank you. I think this is a great note to end this discussion. We saw how much is at stake. It's survival of Ukraine as a European democracy, but also of European Union as a global power. How it manages this process will define its role in the global affairs. Thank you.
Thank you.